What happens when an undercover CEO orders a meal at his diner and stops when he hears the waiter crying in the kitchen? A story unfolds, full of heart, secrets, and the kind of truth that hits you deep. Let's dive in to see. Miles Tanner was the kind of man who built things from nothing. At 42, he had a sharp jawline, tired hazel eyes, and hands that still remembered the feel of scrubbing floors. He grew up with empty pockets and a rumbling stomach, but now he owned diners across the country, 27 of them, each one a little piece of his dream. Tanner's diners, they called them, simple places where people could sit, eat, and feel at home. Miles wasn't the type to sit in a fancy office all day. He liked to move, to see things for himself. That's why every few months he'd put on an old jacket, mess up his hair, and walk into one of his own places like he was just another guy looking for a burger. On a chilly Tuesday afternoon, Miles pulled his truck into the parking lot of the diner in Willow Creek, a small town tucked between hills and dusty roads. The sign out front flickered a little, Tanner's Diners in red letters. He didn't call ahead. He never did. He wanted the real picture, how the staff worked, how the food tasted, how the air felt when nobody knew the boss was watching. He stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling soft and familiar. The place smelled of fries and coffee, the kind of smell that hugged you. Booths lined the walls, half filled with folks eating or talking low. Miles slid into a corner seat, pulling the hood of his jacket up just enough to shadow his face. A waiter walked over, a young guy, maybe 20, with messy brown hair and a name tag that read Rylan. He had a thin frame, like he hadn't eaten enough lately, and his eyes looked heavy, carrying something Miles couldn't place. "Hey man, what can I get you?" Rylan asked, his voice steady but quiet, like he was saving energy for something else. Miles kept it simple. "Burger and fries. Coffee black." He watched Rylan nod and scribble it down, his hand shaking just a little. Miles didn't say anything about it. He leaned back, taking in the room. The cook behind the counter, a big guy named Hank from what the chatter told him, flipped patties with a rhythm that said he'd done it 1,000 times. Another waiter, older, maybe 50, with gray streaks in his hair and a tag that said Glenn, moved slow between tables, refilling cups. It all looked normal, the kind of normal Miles fought to keep in every diner he owned. The food came fast. Rylan set the plate down, the burger steaming, fries golden. "Here you go," he said, his voice flat now, like he was somewhere else. Miles nodded thanks and took a bite. It was good, juicy, not too greasy, the way he'd taught his cooks years ago. He sipped the coffee, hot and strong, and let himself relax. This was why he did it, these little moments where everything worked. Then he heard it, a sound, sharp and broken, cutting through the hum of the diner. It came from the kitchen, past the swinging doors where Rylan had just disappeared. Miles froze, burger halfway to his mouth. It wasn't a yell or a crash. It was softer, sadder, a choked sob, quick and muffled, like someone didn't want it heard. He set the burger down slow, his ears straining. There it was again, a hiccup of tears, then a whisper he couldn't make out. Miles glanced around. Nobody else seemed to notice. Glenn kept pouring coffee. Hank kept flipping patties. But Miles couldn't unhear it. Something was wrong. He pushed his plate aside and stood, moving quiet toward the kitchen doors. He didn't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the part of him that still remembered being a kid with nowhere to go. He peeked through the little window first. Rylan stood there, back to the wall, his shoulders shaking. Hank was at the grill, facing away, headphones on, lost in his own world. Rylan's hands covered his face, and his whole body looked like it might collapse under some invisible weight. Miles pushed the door open, soft as he could. Rylan didn't hear him at first. Up close, the kid's sobs were raw, like they'd been held in too long and finally broke free. "Hey," Miles said, keeping his voice low, gentle. Rylan jumped, spinning around, his eyes red and wide. What are you doing back here?" Rylan stammered, wiping his face fast with his sleeve. His voice cracked, and he stepped back, like he wanted to disappear into the wall. Miles held up his hands. "Just checking. Heard you. You okay, man?" He kept his tone easy, like they were old friends, even though his chest tightened seeing the kid like this. Rylan blinked hard, swallowing. "I'm fine. Just nothing. You shouldn't be back here." He turned away, grabbing a tray like he could pretend nothing happened. Miles didn't move. "Doesn't sound like nothing. What's going on?" He stepped closer, not crowding, just enough to show he wasn't leaving easy. Rylan's shoulders slumped, and for a second, Miles thought he'd shut down. But then the kid let out a shaky breath, and words spilled out, quiet and fast. "It's my brother. He's in the hospital again. They don't know if he's gonna make it this time, and I can't pay for it. I can't even go see him, 'cause I'm stuck here working doubles just to keep the lights on at home." His voice broke, and he pressed a fist to his mouth, like he could stop the rest from coming. Miles felt it hit him, heavy and cold. He'd been broke before, scared before, but this was a kid drowning. "How old's your brother?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. 15, Rylan said, barely a whisper. "His name's Toby. He's got this thing with his lungs, been bad since he was little. Doctors say it's getting worse, and He stopped, shaking his head. "I don't know what to do." Miles nodded slow, his mind racing. He could see it now, the weight on Rylan's shoulders, the way it bent him. "You been carrying this alone?" he asked. Rylan shrugged, looking at the floor. "Hank and Glenn know some of it, but they've got their own stuff. I don't want to dump it on them. And my dad, he's gone, been gone years. It's just me and Toby now." Miles took a breath, letting the quiet settle. He'd seen hard times, pulled himself out of them, but he knew not everyone got that chance. "You shouldn't have to carry it alone," he said, firm but kind. "What's the hospital bill looking like?" Rylan laughed, a bitter little sound. "More than I'll ever make. Thousands. Tens of thousands, maybe. I don't even want to look at it anymore." Miles nodded again, his jaw tight. He could feel the old fire in him, the part that hated seeing good people break. "Hold on a sec," he said, stepping back toward the dining area. Rylan looked confused, but Miles didn't explain. He walked to his table, grabbed his jacket, and pulled out his phone. He didn't care about the undercover thing anymore. This was bigger. Back in the kitchen, he found Rylan still standing there, staring at the tray like it might tell him what to do. "Listen," Miles said, "I'm gonna help you out. Don't ask how, just trust me on this." Rylan's head snapped up. "What? No, I don't even know you, man." Miles gave a small smile, tugging his hood down. "Name's Miles. I own this place. All the Tanner's diners, actually." He watched Rylan's eyes widen, his mouth opening like he couldn't believe it. "Yeah, I know, sounds crazy. But I'm not messing with you. I've been where you are, scared, stuck, thinking there's no way out. I'm not letting you sink." Rylan stared, his breath hitching. You're the boss? For real?" "For real," Miles said. "Now tell me about Toby. What's he need? Meds? Surgery?" Rylan blinked, like he was waking up. Yeah, surgery. His lungs, they're shutting down slow. Docs say there's this thing they can do, but it's crazy money, and insurance won't touch it." Miles pulled up a chair from the corner and sat, leaning in. "Okay, here's what's happening. I'm calling my guy, Darren. He handles the numbers. We're covering Toby's bill. All of it. And you're taking time off, paid, to be with him. No arguing." Rylan's knees buckled a little, and he grabbed the counter. You can't just do that." "Why would you?" Miles leaned back, his voice soft but sure. "Because I can. Because I've watched too many people lose everything when they didn't have to. And because you're part of this place, Rylan. You're not just a waiter to me." Tears spilled down Rylan's face then, fast and messy, and he didn't try to hide them. "I don't know what to say. I can't pay you back." "Don't need you to," Miles said. "Just take care of your brother. That's enough." The kitchen door swung open then, and Hank turned, pulling off his headphones. "What's going on back here?" he asked, his deep voice rumbling. He saw Rylan crying, Miles sitting there, and froze. "Everything okay?" Miles stood, clapping Hank on the shoulder. "Yeah, man. Just sorting some stuff out. Rylan's taking a break for a bit. Family stuff. You and Glenn hold it down, all right?" Hank nodded slow, glancing at Rylan. "You good, kid?" Rylan wiped his face, nodding. Yeah, I think so." Miles stepped out to make the call, leaving Rylan to catch his breath. Darren picked up on the second ring. "Hey boss, what's up?" "Got a situation," Miles said, pacing the parking lot. "Kid named Toby, 15, in the hospital here in Willow Creek. Lung thing bad. Surgery's expensive, and his brother's one of ours, Rylan, works at the diner. I want it covered. Full bill, no questions. And Rylan's off the clock, paid, till the kid's better." Darren whistled low. "That's big, Miles. You sure?" "Dead sure," Miles said. "Make it happen. Today." "On it," Darren said, and Miles could hear the grin in his voice. "You're a softy, you know that?" Miles chuckled, kicking a pebble across the lot. Yeah. Just do it." Back inside, Rylan was sitting now, head in his hands, but he looked lighter, like some of the weight had lifted. Glenn had wandered in, too, leaning against the wall with a mug of coffee. "Boss, huh?" Glenn said, raising an eyebrow at Miles. "Didn't peg you for the big man." Miles shrugged. "Don't like the spotlight. Just here to keep things running." Rylan looked up, his voice small. "I don't know how to thank you. Toby, he's all I've got." Miles crouched down, eye level with him. "You don't have to thank me. Just go see him. Tell him he's got a shot now. That's what matters." The rest of the day blurred into motion. Rylan left for the hospital, his steps shaky but quick, like he couldn't believe it was real. Miles stayed, helping Hank and Glenn through the dinner rush. He flipped burgers, poured coffee, even washed a few dishes, things he hadn't done in years. It felt good, grounding, like he was back where he started. Word spread fast in Willow Creek. By nightfall, folks at the diner were whispering about the mystery guy, who turned out to be the owner, about how he'd saved Rylan's brother. Miles didn't care for the attention, but he couldn't stop the warmth in his chest when Glenn clapped him on the back and said, "You're all right, boss." Later, Miles sat in his truck, the engine off, staring at the flickering sign. He thought about Rylan, about Toby, about the kid he used to be, hungry, scared, alone. He'd built all this, these diners, to make sure nobody felt that way if he could help it. And today he had. The next morning, Miles drove to the hospital himself. He found Rylan in Toby's room, sitting by the bed. Toby was small, pale, hooked up to machines that beeped steady and slow. Rylan looked up, surprised. "You didn't have to come," he said. "Wanted to," Miles said, pulling up a chair. "How's he doing?" Rylan smiled, faint but real. "Better. Docs say the surgery's tomorrow. They think he's got a chance now." Miles nodded, looking at Toby. "He's a fighter, huh?" "Yeah," Rylan said, his voice thick. "Like me, I guess." Miles stayed a while, talking with Rylan about nothing and everything, favorite foods, dumb jokes, dreams they'd tucked away. It wasn't about fixing anything now. It was just about being there. And when he left, promising to check in, Rylan grabbed his hand, quick and firm. "Thanks, Miles," he said, eyes shining. "For real." Miles squeezed back. "Anytime, man." Days turned to weeks. Toby's surgery went smooth, and he started getting stronger, little by little. Rylan came back to the diner, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Miles kept showing up, too, not undercover anymore, just as himself. The crew got used to it, Hank teasing him about his grill skills, Glenn slipping him extra coffee like they were buddies. One night, after closing, Miles sat in the empty diner with Rylan, fries between them. "You ever think about what's next?" Miles asked. Rylan shrugged. "Maybe. Toby wants to cook, you know. Like Hank. I might help him get there someday." Miles smiled. "He'd be good at it. You both would." Rylan looked at him, steady. "You gave us that shot. I won't forget it." Miles didn't say anything for a minute, just let the quiet sit. Then he nodded. "Life's too short to let the good ones fall," he said, soft and sure. And in that little diner, under the hum of the lights, two guys who'd been strangers not long ago shared a moment that felt like family. Outside, the world kept turning, but inside, something had changed, something real, something lasting. Miles knew it, deep down. This was why he kept going. This was why it all mattered. That's the story, friends. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a pleasure sharing it with you all. Don't forget to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. It's always fun to see the global reach of these stories. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories, tips, and tricks. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. If you'd like to show some extra love, tap the 3 dots near the share button and send a super thanks.